නමෝ තස්සේ භගවතු අරහතු සම්මා සම්බුද්දස්සේ නමෝ තස්සේ භගවතු අරහතු සම්මා සම්බුද්දස්සේ නමෝ තස්සේ භගවතු අරහතු සම්මා සම්බුද්දස්ස. Dear friends in the Dharma, blessings to all of you. During this Dhamma sermon, I would like to discuss with you a very frequent visitor to our mind. We know that throughout the day, we experience all different kinds of emotions, not the same kind. We experience joy, we experience frustrations, we experience loving, caring feeling, we experience sometimes anger. There can be so many visitors to our mind at any given day. But if I ask, what would be the most frequent visitor to our mind? You may have different answers, but I can assure that anger can be one of most frequent visitors to our mind. So today, let us talk about anger and let us learn the techniques, the teachings that Buddha has given us to deal with this anger. And anger is a very common human emotion. So it is very common and is in a way, for an ordinary human being, it can be so natural. But what we need to remember is that if we experience this anger very frequently in our day, or if we are getting angry too often, that can be really unhealthy. And particularly, anger is also one of the defilements that we need to overcome in our spiritual path. Of course, it could be the other side of the coin when we have craving or desire, and the anger would be the opposite of it. But they are all related. So let me share my own experience with you. And I also would like to invite you to remember an incident that you got really angry recently. What was the moment that you got really, really angry recently? Maybe, you got angry because, something was broken. Or maybe someone did not fulfill their promise. Maybe someone tell lie to you. You may have some incident in your life. But let me share my incident. Of course, anger is still visiting my mind, but I try to recognize it, and I try to not to keep the anger too long. So it's okay in a way, if the anger is only a visitor, then and it's not that dangerous. But if you give anger a room in your mind, if you give that anger accommodation in your mind, and then it's going to be so troublesome. So let me share with you an incident where anger visited my mind, and that that way we can continue. That way we can discuss how we can handle this. And of course, we can also refer to the teachings of the Buddha how to handle this. These days, I am teaching a few young monks. I'm teaching those young monks to memorize the stanzas and learn Pali language. So I have given them some tasks. So I would like all these young monks or novice monks to complete their task in a timely fashion. So every morning they have to come and show me their work. So every evening they have to memorize certain stanzas, and then they should come in and read those stanzas by heart. So few days ago, I experienced that those novice monks did not bring their homework to me, did not bring their homework to me to check. And then I was now feeling little frustrated, and I was feeling little anger. And then I was not feeling, it was uneasy. As you know that, whenever we are angry, it's not a comfortable feeling. It is uneasy feeling. So I was having this uneasy feeling. I was, thinking really badly about these young monks. I really wanted to know what is going on there. So while I was having these angry thoughts, I went to see these young monks, what they are doing. And then I realized that actually on that specific day, they were given another task by one of the other elder monks. So actually they were cleaning our dining hall in that morning. So therefore they did not have time to do their homework and come to me. But before I get to know that, in my mind, I was feeling frustrated and angry. So I try to analyze, what is really going on here. So I realized that actually the anger is related to our expectations. And usually anger arises in our mind when our expectations are not met. We expect someone to behave in a particular way. We expect certain things to happen in a particular way. We expect certain tasks to be done by given a deadline, and we can have all kind of expectations. When there is a gap between our expectations and what really happened, then we may get angry. So I noticed the relationship between anger and expectations, because I was expecting the young monks to complete their tasks on time. I was expecting them to come to me with their homework. So those expectations were not met, and then I start to feel angry. Then, of course, then I was also having all other thoughts. But before that, let us examine the origin of anger, how anger arises. And so if you go to the teachings of the Buddha, and Buddha has a very interesting and specific, interesting teaching on to explain how anger arises. The Buddha said that in the Titiya Sutta, there are two factors for anger to arise. One is called patigha nimitta, which means unpleasant or disagreeable experience, something that is unpleasant or disagreeable, something like irritating. The second factor is called ayoniso manasikara. Roughly, very simply, we can translate that, that technical term into unwise thinking. So when we have an unpleasant experience, and when we add unwise thinking to that unpleasant experience, then anger can arise in our mind. So sometime, we can have some physical unpleasant experience. Sometimes we can have mental unpleasant experience or disagreeable experience. In my case, I was expecting these young monks to come, show up in front of me with their books, and then I will check their homework and give them feedback and give them guidance. So I was expecting that. But when these young monks did not appear in front of me, it was a disagreeable experience for me. And then I had certain expectations that created the conditions for the anger to arise. But then unwise thinking, like, is also not only a disagreeable, unpleasant experience, but also how we think about this incident, how we interpret these incidents is the key factor for us to develop anger. We can have a painful experience, maybe sometime, we may hit ourselves against something, or maybe we can be in a very difficult weather, for example, or maybe you can be in a traffic jam, when you had like a stay long, at one single place for a long time. It's not a pleasant experience, right? So you'll be there waiting and waiting for the vehicles to move, and it's not a pleasant experience. It's an unpleasant experience. It is uh, it is, and then, but its unpleasant or disagreeable experience itself will not generate anger. This is the key. This is the wisdom that we have to have. We go through all disagreeable, irritable, unpleasant experiences throughout the day, physically and mentally. But what really bring anger to our mind is actually the interpretation, how we interpret, and the secondary thoughts we can have about that incident. For example, let's say we are stuck in traffic, and we can think about it, right? We can interpret it. We can, if we think, okay, someone was driving very badly, or some other people are not driving well, or someone has driven recklessly and met with an accident. So therefore, I had to be here stuck. So, and whenever you try to put blames on someone else, and that's unwise thinking, and that can bring so much anger to us. But let's say if we think in a different way, let's think that, okay, maybe someone is sick, maybe an ambulance wants to go to hospital. So someone has closed the junction for the ambulance to move. That may be the reason. If we think in that way, maybe that could be true. So if we interpret, if we find different reasons for that traffic to occur, if we find some fair reason for that traffic to occur, we may not get angry as much as earlier. So anyway, we need to remember that our interpretation, our thinking about the unpleasant experience is the key for us to give anger. And our thinking can happen in many ways. Like our thinking happen in many ways, many directions. One way that bring us anger is that when we think that whatever other people have done, other people have missed to do, if we think other people's behavior, irritable, unpleasant behavior, is intentional behavior, and then we can get angry. For example, I was, if I go back to the experience that these young monks didn't come to me at a given, come with their homework, and if I think, if I interpret, if I keep on thinking about the incident that these young monks purposely ignored me, and they did not come with their homework intentionally to avoid me, to ignore me, if I interpret that situation in that way, I will get really, really angry. So sometimes, some people may miss things, and some people may do things that we don't agree with, or we cannot approve. But if we interpret those actions as intentional actions, and then we can get very angry. But if we realize that actually their actions were not intentional, maybe, for example, in my case, these young monks did not come because they have another task to do with the advice from another senior monk. Their action, or maybe the reason that they did not come to me was not intentional, and they are simply busy with some other thing. And then when we realize that it was not intentional, and then there's no condition or supporting factors for anger to retain in my mind. So I have an interesting story to tell you. At one time, one farmer was bringing his vegetables to his market, to the market to sell, and but he was living on the other side of the river, so he had to use a boat to carry or transport his vegetables to the market. So one day he was load his vegetables to his boat, and as a full of vegetables, now he's slowly moving along the river to go to the market. And then he saw there was a big boat coming in front of him, And after a while, he realized that that bird that coming from the opposite direction is coming towards his side. And he shouted to stop and stop, move away. But looks like this boat was not making any turn. It's keep coming to his boat. He tried his best to divert his boat, but somehow at the end that boat continued to come and then hit his boat, and his boat was shaken, and some of his vegetables fell down to the water. And now he got really angry, because he worked so hard to collect this vegetables, and he really want to go to market and sell these vegetables. And then when he got really angry, he shouted to the person in the other boat, and he started to insult him and blame him. And after a while, he realized that there was no response from the other side. No matter how hard and how insulting words that he was speaking, but there was no response from the other side. And after a while, he realized that actually that boat that came and hit his boat was a driverless boat, and it was not driven by anyone. It was there, and somehow it was tied into a post, and that rope was somehow loosened, and then this boat was moving by itself. So when this farmer realized that there was no driver, there was no one inside this boat, it just happened, it was an accident, and he started to feel less angry. Of course, he still feel frustrated and unhappy, but his anger was less when he realized that unpleasant situation, unpleasant experience, negative experience was not intentional. So therefore, we need to think about in that way. Sometime when people do things, when people forget things, if we interpret that as an intentional act, we may get more angry. Of course, sometime those things can be intentional too. Of course, people intentionally hurt us, people intentionally insult us. Of course, there can be so many situations that people are harming or hurting us intentionally. But I will invite you, sometime we need to really, see whether the other people's behavior is intentional. Some behavior that are that are irritable behavior may not be intentional. Of course, even though they are intentional act, then there are still ways to deal with them. Sometimes we need to think about why they want to do this intentional harming. And most of the cases, if someone is intentionally hurting you, harming you, and those people are actually victims of their own defilements. They are victims of their own habitual patterns. They have no freedom to think. They don't have enough wisdom. So of course, we have to protect ourselves, and we have to take measures to protect ourselves, and not to always be exposed to their hurtful words or their harmful actions. We need to create a space. We need to create boundaries. But in order for us to quench in order for us to feel peaceful inside, we can think differently. Remember, the very important key ingredient, so the factor for anger to arise is unwise thinking, the way we think about it. So even though someone has done something to you intentionally, and then even in that case, we can think about them as victims to their own defilements. And just think about, such people who are harming us, hurting us intentionally, and those people are going to get the karmic results of their actions. And they will reach the karmic results of their actions. And then if they continue that habit, and they will hurt other people too, and they will get into many troubles, and their life will not be that happy. Although sometimes when people are angry, when they are hurting and blaming or harming others, they look very strong. But actually, anger or the aggressiveness is not a sign of strength. people become angry when they are really weak inside of their mind. The anger or aggression is simply an expression of a pain inside a person. It's an expression of weakness inside of the person. That person doesn't feel like he can handle this, so he get angry, he get frustrated, he just throw out. So therefore, anger and aggressiveness is not really a sign of strength. The anger and aggression comes from a place of weakness, place of fear, a place of pain, rather than the place of strength. So therefore, we can think along these lines and then develop maybe compassion towards those people who are hurting us. And so when we change that thinking, it can help us a lot. And then on the other hand, actually, that is how anger arises in our mind. Anger arises in our mind when we encounter an unpleasant or disagreeable situation, an experience, and then when we add our unwise thinking, then anger can arise. But anger can grow also. Anger can arise, but anger can grow also. How anger can grow? Anger grows through thoughts. Again, like unwise thinking, and maybe indulging in the same unwise thinking can feed the anger. So when anger arises, whether anger will stay long in our mind or not also depends on how we think about it. And our thoughts are the food for our anger. So therefore, if we keep thinking about a bad incident, let's say someone blamed you a few days ago, and that really hurt you, and now that is not a pleasant experience, but you can keep, if we simply keep thinking about it again and again, the same incident. Sometimes we have this habit of replaying the negative incidents happen in the past, and if we keep thinking about it again and again and replaying the same bad incident again and again, definitely we will grow anger. Most of the cases, sometimes people blame us only once, but we can replay that incident again and again many times. So we kind of blame ourselves many times. The actual blame was only once, but we can replay that incident and blame ourselves many times. And the more we do it, and the more we grow the anger, and then and as a result, what's going to happen is that we are going to get the consequences of this anger, because keeping anger is not healthy, and keeping anger is not spiritually beneficial, and it's always not a wise thing to do. Of course, Buddha has said once that the anger is like an inner enemy. Usually what enemies wish for us can happen when we are angry. For example, there are enemies in our life. Those enemies do not like us to look good. And then those enemies may not like us to sleep well. And those enemies may not like us to do our job well. And those enemies may not like us to have good relationships. But all these things can happen if we have anger within us. We can look bad, and we cannot have good sleep. We cannot perform our duties well. We may ruin our relationships. So all these things can happen. Therefore, we really need to learn how to manage this, and because now that anger arises in our mind due to the unpleasant experience, and importantly due to our unwise thinking. So if we control the unwise thinking part, if we reinterpret our unpleasant experience, if we try to think differently about this unexpected unpleasant experience, we will be able to gradually overcome this anger. So we shouldn't be afraid of being angry. It is normal, but we should recognize it, we should accept it, and then we should think about it differently. Do not feed your anger with thoughts. try to find a different way to think about it, and then we'll be able to overcome our anger. So it's okay that your anger is visited to your mind, but don't give accommodation to the anger. And if you don't give accommodation to the anger, ultimately the anger may stop visiting you. So I wish you all the strength and courage and wisdom from the teachings of the Buddha to deal with your anger. Thank you.